the one thing I wanted to start us with is, because I think this will sort of frame the entire conversation, is accomplished forgotten dreams. What does that mean to you? You know, how does it shape your life? Where did that come from?
So I've been an entrepreneur now for 13 years. So all of my 20s, now 3 years into my 30s. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I woke up and I posted on Facebook that I'm accomplishing things that I forgot to dream about. Meaning I became an entrepreneur, I'm in media, and I started doing all these things that I didn't think about as a kid because my mom never talked about it, my dad never talked about it. Nobody in my family were entrepreneurs. Everybody had 9-to-5s. They did customer service, like average kind of jobs. And I was doing everything that I never thought I would do because I never talked about it. So when I became an entrepreneur and got into media and started hosting and doing TV, I didn't have anybody to speak to about it because nobody around me was doing it. And then I started meeting a lot of strangers that became mentors that ended up being like some of my best friends because they were doing multiple things that I was now doing. So I say I'm accomplishing dreams I forgot to dream about because I didn't dream about becoming the person I am today because I didn't know I can become this person. So that's like my trademark quote that I use all the time. So it's kind of like that saying of you can't be what you can't see. Like you're accomplishing dreams that your mom never told you can be until you became it.
That's great. And so how did you become an entrepreneur? How did that start? What did you think you were going to be? And then how did you land on entrepreneurship? Because you've accomplished a lot over the last 13 years. I'm sure have even bigger goals that we'll talk about as well. But what was the beginning? Was there a pivotal moment and a light bulb that goes off and you're like, yeah, I'm just going to do this? Or was it totally haphazard?
A little bit of both. It was definitely random of me becoming an entrepreneur because I graduated high school, 16 turning 17. I finished early because I started early. And right before we left in our senior year, I went to Catholic school, all-girl Catholic school. So anything extracurricular activities was religion, choir. It was nothing fun, basically. And our last year, it was the first time they ever added a business class, where people would come in, talk to us about business and talk to us about investing in like Apple and stuff like that. So that's the first time I really started hearing about business, but that was it. I was already done high school. That was my free class. And then I was like, all right, fine. But when I was in high school, I started part-time jobs in like doctor's office and doing events. So I started doing part-time jobs for this guy that owned an event company. And then when I finished, because I finished early, I didn't go straight to college. I worked and I moved out right after high school. And I said, hey, I can come work for you. And I started working for him for probably like a year or two. Moved out, I stayed with a friend, stayed with my grandma down south, moved back to Philly, and then got my own place. And then I said, hey, I would love to do events with you. He was like, you should be a consultant with us. I'm like, what's that? He was like, you're just going to work for us, as not an employee, but just consult with us and do events. And I was like, all right, I did that in high school. I can do that. Worked with him for a while. And then it was a family-owned business. And then his wife passed away. And he ran the business for about 5 or 6 years prior to that. He didn't want to do the business anymore. And he was working on a lot of projects with like doctor's office and like corporates. And he would do a lot of their events internally, externally. And I said, oh, I would love to still work with you. He was like, well, if you want to take over my clientele, you can do that. And I said, okay. So I started doing a lot of work with him, and then we kind of transitioned to me, and it was called like TKA Productions, which is my initials. And I wasn't like official business, but I said, okay, I can do that. So he kind of mentored me through that. And then I still was working in different jobs. So I was like a hostess, I worked at a restaurant, and then I got into payroll because I'm good with numbers, and then went to Sunoco for a while, and then that's how I ended up going to college because Sunoco had tuition reimbursement, so they paid for me to go to school. And then I said, all right, I'll work here for a while. I started doing events with them and then doing payroll with them as well, and then changed the company to Prestige Concepts from TK Production. Actually made it a company, got an LLC and all of that, and started doing events and marketing with his mentorship. And then I said, all right, cool, I can do this. Was at Sunoco for about 3 years, got laid off, and got laid off with a pension, got laid off with my 401k, I cashed it out. I got laid off with a bonus. I got laid off with a unemployment, and that's how I funded my first 5 years of my business. Yeah, it was really interesting. It was really interesting.
So you touched on, when you were in high school, I guess, having some odd jobs of doctor's offices and other things. What was your first job? And did that, start shaping the trajectory for what you would become?
So my first job was a doctor's office. You know how they put stuff in the little room where like, oh, these jobs are available. So it was at a doctor's office that I would work at after school and on the weekends. And then after that, it was kind of like the normal jobs of like clothing stores and Victoria's Secret. And, I worked at a restaurant. I worked at Fridays. I worked at Maggiano's. Like I did all those little jobs that you do when you need some extra money. But my first job was a doctor's office. So I did like admin and filing. And that was like the gist of my jobs, and like computer and typing because I was good with computers.
And, you were saying that, the 9 to 5 was sort of the vision for, what you could be when you grew up. I had a quasi-similar experience in that, like, my parents were entrepreneurs. My dad was in the military. It was never a path. I never even thought about it. So it's certainly one of the things that we're trying to do at 1776, and especially through Startup Grind, is having more exposure to entrepreneurship. And I think that it's just becoming more mainstream now as well. There's different entrepreneurs that you can follow on all these social media channels. And I'm old enough to say that there wasn't really social media when I was in high school. Yeah. Yeah, now kids are like, what's MySpace? So, that's one of the things that we're trying to do, and I think a lot of other people in Philadelphia are trying to do, is just have exposure of that this is an option. It doesn't have to be the end-all, be-all. It's not going to be the thing that everybody's going to choose, but to just say that, hey, this exists as an option out there. Thoughts, ideas on how we as Philadelphians can do that for the younger generation, of just bringing them in, having events like this and reaching out to them to just, provide more options.
Well, I know when I was younger, I definitely had that entrepreneur-like mindset, because I would, those commercials that, hey, if you want to build this, and then you're supposed to send something in, like if you want to build something, and they had these commercials where you can send ideas and they're supposed to make it for you. Remember those old commercials? So I was that person that say, hey, we should have like a 2-sided cassette tape. So I always thought about being an entrepreneur, but I didn't know what it was called. I just knew I had a lot of ideas. And I knew I wanted to be multiple things. Like I wanted to be a psychiatrist for a while. I wanted to be a dermatologist for a while because I had like really bad skin for a minute. So I really wanted to do skincare. I wanted to be a choreographer because I was in like a lot of dance classes and tour with Janet Jackson. It was a lot. So it was a lot of things I wanted to do. And then I got my first computer. I was the first one in my class to get my computer, and the computer was in my room. And my mom never really used it. She bought it for me because I wanted to do more outside of just typing. They only teach you typing in computer class, not actually how to use the computer. And I was the person like that wanted to learn more about computers and break it down. I said, Mom, I want to learn more about this. But instead of putting me in like tech or computer classes, she put me in like dance or drama classes. But it's also your culture of understanding like, women of color, like they don't think tech, they don't think business. They'll put you in drama, they'll put you in dance, and then guys will go into sports. So because my mom and, my family at that time didn't really get it, I probably would have done more as a child than I did having to do with business. Thankfully, I ended up falling into it. I think whatever you're meant to do, you're going to fall into it anyway. But it's also understanding that people's families' mindset is different. That if you're exposing the kids to it, but their parents are not, or their adult in their lives are not encouraging them to do it, it has to be a two-way street. Because if you're excited about it and then you come home and your parent doesn't encourage you or pay for it or take you to it, then it's going to be hard for you to grow into that person. It's going to take you a while to get there. So it took me a while to get there. And the first 5 years of my business, it was a lot of Googling. It was a lot of talking to the guy that was mentoring me. I couldn't go to my mom. She didn't get it. She was like, go work at UPS. I'm like, no. Like, seriously. My mom has done those type of jobs. She's worked at the post office, UPS. She was a correctional officer at CSTF. Like, she's done all those types of jobs. And she still does that to this day. I mean, she still uses AOL to this day. Like, seriously. Like, I'm not even joking. And dial-up. I don't even know they still had it. But so it goes back into your family and understanding, like, you have to get excited about teaching kids about technology, but understand that their culture is so different. So just teaching them how they add business and tech to the things they're already used to. Meaning in certain cultures, you're doing hair and nails and beauty and stuff like that. And that's fine, because that may run in your family. You may be used to doing those type of 9-to-5s, but teaching them how to add business and technology to that, so it's not such a culture shock of, oh, you can go from, working at UPS to building a software company. Their mind can't switch that quickly. It takes a while to understand that you can do that. Because I would come up with so many ideas when I was younger, but I never knew I could be the one to create it. And I didn't realize that until I was in my 20s, which now I feel old because I'm like, everybody's coming up with stuff at 16. I was like, damn, I wish, you got like millionaires at like 10. And I'm like, damn, like, can I go back and like really think about it and be that person that was like the first on YouTube? Right. I wish I can go back and be the first on YouTube. Because now those people are making millions from their YouTube, but I didn't have that encouragement around me to know I can actually accomplish those things.
But you raised a good point when you talk about your mom and, not completely understanding what you're doing, and, she just has a different mindset. When a lot of people talk about entrepreneurs, how many people do we have here tonight that are entrepreneurs? So you guys get, actually, a majority of our audience, that's great. There's a lot of highs and lows to entrepreneurship, and so it's different than the 9-to-5, and it's not that there isn't stress in a 9-to-5, it's a different kind of stress. And I think that the highs and lows from entrepreneurship, they aren't monthly, they aren't weekly, they aren't daily, they're almost hourly. That, you have a great morning, you walk out of a meeting, you're on cloud 9, and then you get an email and a deal falls apart. Yeah, that you worked on for 6 months, and it just creates this wild roller coaster. So as you were, building yourself up as an entrepreneur, what did you look to for a support system? Whether it could be your mom supporting you in different ways, or other family members, mentors that you reached out to. Almost every entrepreneur I've spoken with has like a group of other founders that, are sometimes operating completely other businesses, a family member that they can lean on, a good friend, because sometimes it's just, the roller coaster is there and it's real.
So I have like 3 things. I have the set of friends that have nothing to do with my business that just give me advice, because sometimes you want to just talk freely and you don't want them to understand, you just want to vent. And then you have the people that understand completely, whether they're fundraising or just trying to grow a business in general, that you want actual advice from. Sometimes I just want to vent and don't say anything. And other times I want actual advice and feedback of what should I do next. But one thing I learned about being an entrepreneur, and over this last decade now, is like, it has to be self-motivation. Because, and I spoke to Tamara, where's she at? 1776, about this, and, last week with Michelle and folks back there about like imposter syndrome. No matter what feedback you get from other people, if you don't believe it yourself, it doesn't matter what they're saying to you. Like, if you are not self-motivating yourself, because the first few years of my company, it was a lot of Googling and a lot of speaking to people, and I had a white male as a mentor. I didn't have like a black woman saying, you can do this. So as he's encouraged me, I'm thinking like, oh, this is great, but I'm still a black female, so you don't get it. So it's still like me having to have that self-motivation of why not you, that you can actually complete it, because no matter who you speak to, if you don't believe it, you can't make somebody else to believe it. And if you go in there already thinking you're not going to do well, you're not going to do well because you're thinking you're not going to do well. So as I pitch and we raise money and all of that, if I'm not going in there and not thinking like, oh, I'm dressed too bright or my hair is too crazy or whatever, that it doesn't matter if people say I did a great job if I don't actually believe I did a great job. So I do a lot of like writing out quotes, whether I make them up myself or I search for quotes that just give me encouragement of like, working at a job is hard, working for yourself is hard, choose what hard you want to do. And I chose this hard because I've been offered jobs that would pay me that I would have been okay for a minute, but it's hard to go back to being an employee once you're an employer. And it's hard to start listening to people and them telling you, you ain't got an hour lunch. And you get off at 5 o'clock after you've already been an entrepreneur. So you have to do a lot of self-motivation.
And you're almost a left brain and a right brain person where, like, I like numbers. You know, you said you're good with numbers. I'm very operationally minded, but I lack the creative side sometimes. I can be creative around problem solving, but not creative around, like, marketing and other things that you're good at. Was that something you realized early on, that you could kind of be the whole package of running that side and running another side? Because a lot of people, it's the strength lies on one side or the other, and people will categorize themselves either as I'm a creative person or I'm an operations person. But you've sort of figured out a way to pull them together, or was that a learned process over time?
Definitely learned. I'm good with numbers, meaning I know better now how to pay myself. So it was learned because it was years of not paying myself and undervaluing a contract where I should have paid myself more, and I didn't take into account how much time it was going to take to actually get the contract done. So it was learned over time to make sure that I was able to pay whoever I had on my team, but then also pay myself. But one thing you learn as you get older, you learn what you're good at and what you're not good at. And I always say learn enough to hire or fire for it. So I learned enough about finances to hire the right people or partner with right people and to manage it to know if they're stealing my money or not. But I'm not the person that does the numbers. Thankfully, on my company now, my partner is financing and operations, like that's his thing. So I let him do that thing. I'll give him the layout of what I'm thinking, and he does that part because that's not the part I enjoy. I enjoy the creative part. I'm the person that I can sit down with somebody and think of like a whole campaign or a whole way to sell companies. Like I'm great at selling companies and partnering with clients, and I focus more on the clients, the creativity, because that's what excites me, and I can think of a proposal in 5 minutes. So I know now what I'm good at, but to be a successful CEO, you have to learn the business side of it. So as much as you want to just be creative, if you don't know how to pay yourself or your team, being creative means nothing if you're not getting paid for it. Right. So.
And let's talk a little bit more about exactly what you're working on now. Well, and actually, you could probably kind of walk us through what your day looks like, because you're still kind of working on a bunch of different initiatives and how you break up your day across them.
So I always say I work in the intersection of tech, community, and media because everything I've done has had all three of those focuses over the last 13 years. So my first company, Prestige Concepts, started as events and marketing, and then we switched to doing like websites and branding, and we've worked with like from Comcast to Paramount Pictures to McDonald's. And honestly, getting more into technology after getting into like websites and learning front-end development, I wanted to do something that was more scalable, because doing a service business is so hard, and it's hard to scale it. It's hard to, hire for it sometimes. And I wanted to switch to building more software that allowed us to sell and scale. So now Prestige Concept, after 10 years, is a holding company that owns my other companies. So we're working on a software company named Stimulus, which we launched about 2 years ago. And that's been a lot of trial and error of just my work with entrepreneurs and enterprises over the last 10 years, and realizing that it was hard for large organizations to hire and contract with suppliers, and it was harder for minorities and women-owned companies to become a supplier with these large enterprises like Comcast. So we're working with enterprises to build a supplier intelligence platform that adds a layer of intelligence on top of their existing tools like their CRM or their procurement platforms to help them better collaborate across the enterprise, to save time and money on how they spend with vendors and suppliers, and really make a better decision of who are you contracting with and who are you working with, but then also supplying them with, hey, this woman can do this contract as well, this minority can do this contract as well, and really diversifying their pipeline. Because the biggest thing that I've learned over 10 years, they always complain, I can't find more women to give a contract to, or I can't find more, people of color to work with. I'm like, I have a whole database of, 8,000 companies, and it's not taking away for who you're currently working with. It's just adding to that pipeline. And then I'm also in media. I've been in media now 10 years. I've been at Radio 1 as a host and producer for 6 years. So I'm on the station every week, and we do content and events, and I don't get to do as much of that as I want to, because when you're fundraising and trying to like build a tech company, that's a full-time job, and then trying to do media is a full-time job. But I've been wanting to expand that, and I was able to get on Fox as a tech expert last year and doing some episodes with them and trying to figure out how to come back and do more of that, and just speaking on different situations with Radio 1 to NBC. So trying to expand. So it's definitely a mixture of tech, community, and media, and like updating how do you use all three to like make your city better.
So among all the full-time jobs, you have like 5 full-time jobs that you're working on right now, and keeping up with the self-motivation piece. What do you do to relax? What do you do to re-energize yourself and get inspired again?
So I think as you talk about the highs and the lows, like I still hate the word no. So anytime I get a no, I'm like, ugh, and then I try to like pick myself up again, or it depends on who gave me the no sometimes. Then I may be okay or get better over, a day or two. So I do a lot of venting first, and then I kick myself up and then just do it again. Or I'll try to exercise or something like that. That helps me because my mind clears quickly when I do that. And then I try to travel. Like I'm going out of town next week to do part business, part, mini vacation. Because I see when I'm in that same route of like going to the office, there 9 to 6 every day for weeks, it just messes up my creativity, and then my brain starts to feel mushy. And then I'm like, all right, if I can't think of anything creative, it's time for me to travel somewhere. I need to leave. And I always get re-inspired when I meet other entrepreneurs in other cities, because everybody's ecosystem is different. Like New York and San Fran and Atlanta, Cincinnati, like everybody's ecosystem is so different when it comes to technology and when it comes to business. So I'll meet up with them, and then I'm like, all right, I'm excited again. Then I get excited to come back home and start working. So I'm going to the software conference next week in San Francisco. I'm going to visit some friends. I'm going to meet with some investors. And then I'm staying for 2 days, and then I'll be back. And then I'm like, all right, I can get back to work. So.
Let's talk about if there's been experiences where you feel like you've been treated differently and gotten some of those no's, whether that's on gender, race, age, a combination of them. What do you do in those circumstances to sort of bounce back, or are there things that you do in the moment when you feel like you've been treated differently?
So when I first started my company at 20, I looked younger then, right? So when you look younger, black woman at the fro, curly hair at the time, it's definitely, you have to oversell yourself because they already think that you're the intern. Or you work for somebody else. So I look young, I probably look like the intern. And then I had to like overly work sometimes. So that's when I knew I had to work more than others. So I probably just bypassed my whole 20s of actually having fun because I was so much selling. And then I did so many things behind the scenes to build up my resume that I made sure that you couldn't tell me no based upon my resume. And now, as I'm pitching, it's a difference between pitching to males and females. Like, the vibe is different, the feeling is different. Even the way you dress in both meetings are different. So I found a way to go in there with the confidence that even if I don't get it, there's a reason why I didn't get it, right? And sometimes it's because of them, sometimes it's because of me, I lost my confidence. It could be anything. And I also have this thing on my computer where anytime I get a no, I put this in this folder that says don't give up. So then when I come back and I reflect on it, if I got a yes on something else, I'll add them to like my MailChimp, but like, okay, I didn't get this, but I got this. Like, you know what I mean? So certain things that make me feel better of like, I didn't get this no, but I didn't get this no for a reason. Then I'm able to reflect back on it instead of seeing it in my inbox. I can go back to it later. So I do little things like that to kind of keep me encouraged and like motivated to like, I may have not gotten this no, but I didn't get this no because I end up getting this yes later. So that's like other forms of motivation for me.
And what's the best advice that you've gotten throughout your career? And, you know, the opposite of that, what might be the worst advice that you've ever gotten? Maybe related to even dealing with some of those situations.
So 2 things having to do with advice, about advice. So 1, take everybody's opinion with a grain of salt. And then also, in reference to that, people give you advice based upon their own experience, not based upon the question that you're asking them. So I had to realize that, for example, one thing that was negative to one investor was a positive to another investor. And it was basically the way we interacted with our corporate clients. Like my background is advanced in marketing, so I know how to get a corporate sponsor to write me like a $20,000 check to do something, to engage with them, because they're so used to being so technology. I kind of switch it where it's like, let me engage with you, let you see my customers and my partners and my stakeholders. Let's start that relationship. I can get a check from you quicker, and then I turn around and sell you what we're actually working on. And that brings them in front of potential customers and partners, and that allows me to not only build with the customers and partners, but build with them. So like we have a partnership coming up with Salesforce. We just became a supplier with them. They're trying to connect with more women entrepreneurs. I have a database of women entrepreneurs. We're doing an event together. They're giving me money for it. And at the same time, we're building our software to integrate with Salesforce. It's like a two-way street. So that really allows me to really build those type of relationships going forward. That's a great way to, work with them.
And when you talk about, somebody viewing one thing as a positive, and then in another meeting they might view that same process or business piece as a negative, how important is it to stay true to your business and not try to adapt to just try to do the dollar grab and try to get a deal done and change who you are or change what the business is about, and just, staying true to what you were building?
Yeah, so as you're building, that's what I've learned. The worst advice I've gotten was from investors. The best advice I've gotten was from customers. And I said, as much as I need the money from the investors, I need to focus on the customers because they're going to pay me at the end of the day. And I had to worry about them, of how they wanted me to engage with them. I knew this is how they wanted me to engage with them. They wouldn't have wrote me a check if they didn't. So I had to take everybody's advice that I got from, investors and be like, okay, I'm going to find the right investors that get this because my customers want this, and I've spent 2 years of working with them to know that. So I know that I'm right. And sometimes you'll go back and you have to, you will second guess yourself because you really need a check from this investor. But then it's like, as much as you want to get a check from this investor, it means nothing if they're not going to turn into your customer too. The point of growing a company, you need customers. You don't want to just grow off of investors. So if my customers say they want this, that's all that matters. So.
Have there been, and that's not to say that companies pivot, right? Doing that based on customer feedback can be. Can you talk about some of those, pivot moments or light bulb moments where you're like, we've been going left and left and left, and we're going to have to take a hard right now, and what that was like for you or what it was like for your team, or walk through some of those circumstances?
So when we started first building Stimulus, it was trying to figure out, we was like, we're going to do the search engine where you can find, businesses and enterprises can find each other. And it was cool. We were going to do a Google search. And then as we were working with the enterprises and the UI and UX and what it looked like on the front end didn't fit with what they normally would have worked with and what they were used to. And the biggest thing when you're selling to enterprises, you don't want to interrupt what they're already using because they've been sold so many things. So you want to be able to integrate with whatever they're using so they're not using 100 more plus the 100 more they're already going to be sold to later. So it took us, a year of networking and sitting down with Comcast and AT&T and all these different companies of we use so much of this stuff, or we only use this for one thing, that we needed to become that layer of intelligence that whatever you were using, we could work with you. So it wasn't us having to oversell you another product to take you off of. Or, if they've been on a product for 10 years, we didn't have to switch you and teach you how to use something different. It just added to what you were already using. So that was a pivot for us of being that layer of intelligence that they're able to see all of their vendors and suppliers in one place and be able to say, hey, marketing department, you should work with this company. Procurement department, you should work with this department or this company, and see all of that information in one place. Nobody was doing. And because everybody had their own platforms that they were using, and they got tired of trying to figure out, they used from Excel to vendor management platforms, and it was like, if we add that and bring it all together, we become a tool that they would use regularly, because every month, every week, they're spending money on vendors and suppliers.
Are there good outside resources that you look to continue that constant learning process of being an entrepreneur that can help, feed the ideas of, if you're going to pivot, then what's the next step, or even just in terms of growing the business, books, podcasts, what's the learning process like for you?
So I go back and forth between podcasts, like How I Built This type podcast, which I love, because I think that would be my favorite, just because when you're building a company, whether it's a tech company or a business company, you start to try to become another company, whether they're a competitor or just, I'm going to build this tech company this way because everybody else is doing it. And my team's going to look like this because everybody else's team in San Francisco looks like this. So I like that show the most, as far as podcasts, because it teaches you that you can have a different type of team, you can have a different type of way you do things. Like I said, because we do a lot of initiatives and partnerships with our enterprises outside of online and technology, we do events and we do programming. Most tech companies don't do all of that. But I had to look at my background, and I had to look at what I'm good at and how I'm able to get a check from them and sell them afterwards is the way I do it, and that works for me. And I had to be okay with that. And then our team looks different. Like, we're not in our 20s anymore. We're not fresh out of college. So, like, my business partner is in his 40s, has a family and kids, and he only comes to office like once a week. So that's different compared to everybody else's team. And then, our tech team is different. It's guys that we used to work with at Comcast, and it's just different. And for a while, that was kind of messing me up. Oh, I need to do this, and I need to make sure my company looks like that, which made me not do anything because I was trying to be like everybody else. And then I read this book about how to be a great leader, and that's one of my favorite books. It had this quote in it of, great leaders don't think less of themselves, they just think of themselves less. And then once I started reading more of that, of like how to be a leader and how to lead your team, because even as a CEO doesn't make you a leader, right? Just owning a company, and I had to learn of what am I good at when it comes to managing a team, when I'm not good at managing a team. Like, I'm not a micromanager, but it's hard for me to give up work like to somebody else, because I'm thinking, like, as I'm teaching you, I could have done it myself. So I had to get better with that. So books like that about how to be a leader, how I built this in reference to podcasts, and how different teams learn how to do different things. And then I try to go in at least one networking event in each city, because everybody networks differently in each city. So I went to one last week in New York, which was really great, and it's a little bit different than how we network in Philly.
And when you start to look at the future, what are some of the goals that you have for yourself and the company this quarter, this year, 5 years from now?
So this quarter, we're in a process of fundraising, so closing that, trying to expand and add to our team is our immediate focus. Our long-term focus is to definitely be bi-coastal, because I travel a lot for speaking and just going to conferences. So being able to do more work on the West Coast. We do a lot on the East Coast, like New York, D.C., and Boston with our partners, but being able to do that same type of partnership on the West Coast. And on like personal brand, expanding in media and technology, and being able to like to speak on my experience and like encourage more young people about how to jump into whether it's business or technology. Just my experience of a lot of trial and error, a lot of pros and cons of teaching yourself, and the different type of mentors you can have, because I do a little bit of everything just because that's what excites me. And you have some people that's like, oh, you do too much. And then I reply back, you do too little. You know what I mean? So I find people in my life that allows me to do multiple things and get it, and I don't have to overly explain it. So I try to put myself around people that are in media and tech and business and whatever it is they enjoy doing, from dog walking to making cupcakes, whatever you enjoy doing, that you can do multiple things and nothing is holding you back from doing that. So I try to be able to find those people in every city that I'm in.
That's wonderful. And so this is going to be my last question for you, so everybody can start, thinking about what questions that they might have for Tiffanie. now that you've done networking events in other cities, you've traveled around to other cities, what's different about building a company in Philadelphia? And that could be good or bad, and it could be specific to fundraising. I talk to a lot of people about fundraising in Philadelphia is wildly different and in a lot of ways way more difficult than when you're, have the same idea in Silicon Valley and like money rains from the sky. So that could be one part of it. But what are the other pros and cons of building a company here in Philadelphia?
So the pro is definitely the cost of living in Philly is great. Like I would never leave Philly just because of that, at least for right now. You can make it and live life off of like $50K in Philadelphia, and that's great. And I feel like it's enough of a city that you can like walk to places. Like I hate walking in New York. It feels like I'm walking for days just to get to like 5 blocks. So that's what I love about Philly, that I feel like it's home and it's comfortable. But that's also a con because you get too comfortable in Philly and you don't have to, go to certain strides because you can be really comfortable in Philly. But in New York, they will call you out. In San Francisco, they will call you out. And especially if you have the same idea in Silicon Valley or New York, you have to try a little bit harder to get, media and partners and press because everybody's selling the same things. But in Philly, it's like, not everybody's building the same thing, so you have a little leeway to get certain partners and stuff like that. It'll be like one of this, one of this. So I think that's a good pro and con. But then I feel like the investors here in Philly are so risk averse that they're scared to give you a fail check, like that check of, I want to see if you do well with this, and if you fail, that's okay. I'll give you more money. You don't get that in Philly, but you'll get that in New York because they're giving money to the same types of companies that they know 2 out of 5 is going to fail. So sometimes you need that. You need that money of believe in me, believe in my team, believe in my advisors that I may not get your money back right now, but you know that we're a good enough team that if we pivot or start a new idea, we're going to make your money back. We don't get that locally. And then we have a tight enough community that we're able to call upon who you need to call upon. You can get to the CEO of Comcast and stuff like that you can't get to in other cities. But then sometimes our small community feels like a small town at times when it comes to, networking and trying to, diversify and separate yourself. Because then they're like, well, so-and-so is doing that. You should talk to her. And you're like, but we're separate companies. And you get a lot of comparison in Philly because we're so small. So that can be a pro and a con as well.
Yeah, I often refer to Philadelphia as the biggest little city. I mean, the circle gets so small, and then in entrepreneurship even more so. Like it closes the loop really quickly. But thank you again for being here tonight.